lesson 7, we're looking at John the Baptist tonight. John the Baptist. The first thing there is the sending of God. And this is going all the way back to like the second lesson. What is the sending of God in Latin, as we call it? What is it? The Missio Dei. M-I-S-S-I-O space D-E-I. Missio Dei. And that, like we said, that's Latin for the sending of God. That's when God sent his Son. And this is the mission of God, that he sends his Son into the world to redeem the world, to reconcile mankind back to himself using his Son Jesus. Or that's the story of the Bible, right? So that's the mission, and we see it advance significantly in John the Baptist, because what is John the Baptist? What is his whole ministry? He announces the Messiah, right? So we'll just talk about John real fast. He's Jesus's relative in that first blank. He is the forerunner to Jesus' mission. So we said that God has probably created this world as the arena in which he's going to defeat evil and end suffering. And he does that at sending Jesus at just the right time into the arena, into this world. That's the sending of God. And John is the guy who's right before that. He's the forerunner. John 3:29, I don't know if you've ever picked up on this, but John is called Jesus' best man. Jesus is the bridegroom, right? And in that passage, it talks about John is his best man. With that, I'm going to take some. John baptized Jesus, which is important because baptism is what initiates Jesus' ministry. It allowed Jesus to fulfill all righteousness, and it allowed Jesus to identify with sinners as the sin bearer. John announces Jesus as Messiah, 1:29. John announces Jesus as God. And then John passes on the mission to Jesus in all humility. What did he say? He's like, got a sandal. I got like 2 different translations, a thong and a sandal and I think of a shoelace. He's not worthy to untie. So yeah, there's this humility, because I think it would be hard to be John and everyone's coming out to see you, right? Like, let's go see this crazy guy. And they're listening to what you say, and some are following, some aren't. But then it's like Jesus shows up, and it's kind of like, wait a minute, I'm not ready to hand over the attention yet. But John does. He says, you must increase and I must decrease. So John did everything right. I mean, he is the perfect example of a disciple. Nowhere in any of the stories of John does he sin. Not that he was sinless, but how he's portrayed, he's always faithful. And he's the perfect partner in ministry to Jesus. What we're going to look at tonight is like one of the, I don't like John. I like John, but I don't like John. Because John is like one of the most challenging characters for me in all the Bible. And we'll see why I don't like that. So John's out. Jesus now is increasing. He's decreasing, but he's still preaching the kingdom of God. And Herod arrests John. And this is not Herod the Great. Herod the Great died probably like 5-4 BC, or maybe 6-5 BC. This is one of his sons, Herod Antipas. And Herod was a tetrarch. And that means a ruler of a fourth. So ruler of who? Of a fourth. Like a quarter, ruler of a fourth. Tetra, 4, and then arch is like ruler. 2 words there. So Herod the Great's territory when he died was divided up among his sons. This Herod right here, Antipas, he kind of controlled the Galilee area. And then he had Herod Philip II, he's called Philip. In Luke 3, kind of lists out 3 of them. and he controlled kind of the northern part, up by like Mount Hermon, and then territory over into like Assyria, modern day Syria. Then there is Linus, I think that's how you say his name. No one really knows what he did. But he's mentioned in Luke 3:1. And then there's the fourth, which is Herod Archelaus. And he was over like Judea area. I don't think he's mentioned in Luke 3:1 because they mentioned Pilate instead of ruling Judea. All right, so if you would, oh wait, I'm not there yet. Herod was considered king of the Jews. He at least considered himself king of the Jews. But he was actually not Jewish. He was a descendant of the Edomites. So he was like a cousin king of the Jews, not really king of the Jews, right? Because Edom descended from Esau, and Esau was the brother of Jacob, and Israel descended from Jacob. But regardless, he considered himself the king of the Jews. And as king of the Jews, John preached Herod should follow the Jewish law, right? And what was Herod doing that was not according to the law?
That John was his brother's wife.
Yeah, he was married to Herodias, who was married to Philip. So he said, you can't do that. That's breaking one of the 10. And so he didn't like that. So he's thrown in prison. That's why he's arrested. So if you would turn to chapter 11 in Matthew. Matthew chapter 11. Verse 1, it says, when Jesus had finished giving instruction to his 12, he departed from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John, while in prison, heard the works of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else? All right, so John's in prison, we know this, and he sends word to Jesus and says, are you the expected one? So the blank there is when John heard of his works, and these works that he's talking about are messianic works. These are the things that the Old Testament said when the Messiah comes, this is what he's going to do. And so these are the works that Jesus is working because he's the Messiah. So he's working the works of the Messiah. And so John's saying, are you the expected one, or shall we look for someone else? And that's in your blank there. And literally, are you the coming one, or is there another one we should expect? And people like to teach this as if John's doubting. I don't think John's doubting. I don't think John's like, I thought you were, but I don't know. I mean, I'm a prophet of God, but I don't know. John, like we saw, he identifies Jesus as the Messiah. He identifies Jesus as God. He knows, like, you must increase, I must decrease. He's not doubting when he's asking this question. And so why do you think, if it's not doubt, why would John be asking this, sending message to Jesus, asking if he's the Messiah? If it's not doubt, if he knows he's the Messiah, what is he really asking?
Will he come save me?
Yeah, that's it. Let's go home. You got it. Yeah, so John has been preaching, what was his message from the beginning? It's been apocalyptic. It's been like the Pharisees come out and he's like, who warned you to flee the wrath to come? He calls them snakes. And then he says, the axe is already laid at the tree. And then he says, and when the Messiah comes, what's he going to do? He's going to baptize. I baptize with water, but when he comes, he's going to baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. Fire is judgment. So his whole concept is when the Messiah comes, we're going to get rid of the enemies, kind of that Old Testament day of the Lord that the prophets always preached. And so Jesus is here. He knows it's Jesus. He knows he's the Messiah. He's like, all right. He gets put in jail. He's like, it's cool. My cousin or relative, whatever he is, he's going to bust me out. And he waits, and nothing happens. So he knows he's the Messiah, John 1:29. He knows Jesus is working the miracles of the Messiah. He just said that in verse 2. So I'm not going to ask the question because you already answered it. So John is still in prison. John is expecting Jesus to free him because he's the main partner in his mission. Like, been a big deal so far. I'm in prison. Now let's set up this kingdom that we've been preaching. And then Jesus' response is this. He alludes to messianic passages from Isaiah. He says, Jesus answered to them, go and report to John what you hear and see. And this is him alluding to the messianic passage. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And he says, and blessed is he who does not take offense at me. So right there, Isaiah 35, I'll put it down there in a box for you to do side by side here in a minute. The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk. And then Isaiah 61:1, the poor have the gospel preached to them. I don't know if yours is a blank there. I can't remember if I did. So blank is preached. And then he says, blessed is he who does not take offense at me. To take offense literally means to stumble. Blessed is the one who doesn't stumble over me. So why would John stumble over Jesus? Why does Jesus say, blessed is he who doesn't stumble, basically at these words of mine? So I put them side by side. So you see what Jesus is saying in verse 5, and here's the text he's alluding to. What did Jesus not say to John? What did he leave out? I put it in bold. Yep. Jesus, on the top of the next page or whatever, Jesus left out his answer, the binding up of the brokenhearted and freedom proclaimed to the prisoners. Where's John again? Prison. Jesus is telling John, I'm not going to bind up your broken heart. In fact, I have heartbreaking news. Jesus' answer is, I am the coming one, but I'm not coming for you. And then I put, here's the hard truth that I think will grow every believer's faith. Jesus is the expected one, but he doesn't always act how we expect he should. And this kind of plays back into Job, remember presumption theology? God not doing what we expect him to do can get us in trouble with our faith. But if we can learn that he is who he is who he says he is the expected one, but he doesn't always act how we expect he should. John expected him to free him. He's expecting that, hey, we got an imposter king here, the Jews. You're the king of the Jews. Let's go ahead and get this started. And Jesus sends the message back that he was not expecting, which was, I'm not coming for you. When Jesus doesn't act how we expect him to in our suffering, we will stumble if we do not know his character and his heart. This is why I don't like John.
So does he want him to set up his earthly kingdom?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's thinking, the Messiah's here. All right, you're doing the works of the Messiah. People are believing, people are seeing, people are walking. Let's go ahead and start the kingdom and get rid of all of our enemies and set up your kingdom here. I don't know if you picked up on it also as JB's teaching Luke. Why is Jesus shushing everybody who says he's the Christ? He doesn't want that yet. Yeah, he doesn't want the testimony of a demon, but he's just started his ministry. And as you'll see, as people start to see him as the Christ, he can't go to cities to preach anymore. So he has to go out in the country where the cities can come to him. So right now he's preaching the kingdom is at hand. So what did Jesus add to his answer? What did Jesus add? The dead are raised up. So he tells John, I'm not coming for you, but the dead are raised up. Just because Jesus might not be acting how we think he should, does not mean he's not acting for our good.
What was the word before the fall?
To take offense means to stumble over.
When Jesus was asking to expect there's double. If you don't know, blank is blank.
Oh, know his character and heart. And I think here we see his character and his heart. He's delivered some harsh news to one of his closest friends, but he adds in the hope of the resurrection. Does anybody else have a J? There's a random J on my page. I don't know if that's something I need to fix. So at the top of whatever page it is, I don't know what page it is, just because Jesus might not be acting how we think he should, does not mean he's not acting for our good. And he doesn't always tell us what our good is. And a lot of times he doesn't say, hey, this is going to get real rough, but it's for your good. You know, this is where we need to know and trust, and this is where faith comes in, to believe that he's working for our good, even when everything doesn't look good. So when suffering comes unexpectedly and Jesus isn't saving like you expect he would or should, do your best to fall back on who he is, not how he appears. This has been one of the toughest lessons in my life. Learning to not look at how he appears to be acting, but to focus on who he is. Not to focus on how you always expected him to act, or hey, I've been praying for a long time on this one thing, and you're not coming through. So then our expectations can start getting us in trouble. When Jesus is not acting how you expect he should, look to the cross as the measure of his love for you, not your circumstances. This is another, I think, a good lesson. It's so easy to look at our circumstances and what's falling apart, what's not going right, what we're disappointed in, what we're discouraged about, and we get so like in the mud, in the weeds and all that was going on that it's hard for us to step back and think about the cross. That's the true measure of his love. And when we think about the cross and how God didn't even spare his own son for us, like that blows my mind because I have a son. I'm like, I would definitely spare him. But God loved us while we were enemies. We weren't adorable children of God. We were enemies. And he still sent his son to reconcile us back to him. And that is a love that I don't know. And that type of love is what has helped me personally through times when I've started doubting or when I've been confused because God's not being God like I expect God to be. So how was the mission of John, God advanced through John the Baptist? So we'll read on. Verse 7, as these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Those who wear soft clothing are the kings and palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, and I tell you, and one who is more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare a way before you. And he says, truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. So in your blank there, born of women, there is no one greater than John. So then Jesus says, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. How does that work? How is the least in the kingdom greater than John the Baptist? This is the guy who is the perfect partner in ministry. It's the guy who is the prophet, forerunner of Jesus, the Messiah. The guy who is about to lay down his life for Jesus. And yet the least in the kingdom will be greater than him. It's because the very least in the kingdom is born of God. The very least in the kingdom are greater because they're born of God. They're children of God. So it's just there's this dichotomy here that John's message is so great because it redeems people to be kingdom citizens. And let me show you. I left a spot there for you. So you have the law and prophets. So in verse 11 he says, 12. It says, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and violent men take it by force. So you have John. It says, since John, or from John, until now. What is the now? It's Jesus. So from John to Jesus, the kingdom of heaven suffered violence, and violent men take it by force. Verse 13, for all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. So, law and prophets until John. So what were the law? How do you spell prophesy?
ETS.
They prophesied. Why can't I think?
ESY.
I swear I graduated.
You had that.
I did have it close. Anyways, so what did they prophesy? What did the law and the prophets, what have they been prophesying until John? I mean, they still prophesy, but the point is, up to this point, when John hits the scene, what has been going on with the law and the prophets? They've been prophesying about the Messiah. And what Jesus is saying, they've been doing this until John, and his only point is until John, because John is now, he's been prophesying about the Messiah. And because John and his ministry and his message and the suffering violence, he's going to suffer violence because the idea behind that is the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. Kingdom is probably functioning as like a metonym for the kingdom citizens. So the people of God's kingdom suffer violence because violent men are trying to take the power of it by force, right? When Jesus shows up, who's he in opposition to? The Pharisees. They don't want to give up control. So, point is, John is, in his message, kingdoms suffering violence, but it's because of his message that people are believing in the Messiah. And so John is huge, but not only is he like, hey, here's Jesus, people are believing because of his message, not in John, but in the Messiah. And so he advances the mission of God, as a prophet, but as one who suffered violence by people who want control. And again, so that's the Missio Dei. He's partnering in the mission of God by bringing people into the people of God, bringing people to faith in God through the Messiah. And then I just put some questions for application. This is something, sometimes I'll do questions, sometimes I'll do exercise. Questions are more for like, I don't know if you guys do quiet time, but I hope you do. But if you have time where you're like, all right, I need to do something or think about something in my quiet time, I don't know what to do, pull these questions out and see how you do. They're just like, how does John the Baptist's faithfulness when delivered the floor-dropping news by Jesus challenge your faith? I don't like it because I don't want to be in that situation, honestly. I don't want to think about it, but I need to, because I need to do a faith check. Where's my faithfulness at? How am I growing and preparing for whatever God's will might be for my life? 2, has John always acted, or has Jesus always acted the way he expected he should? When was the time he did it? You could even follow-up question, how did you respond? How would you respond? How can you use the cross as a reminder over your circumstances of God's love for you? How can you put that as a constant in your spiritual walk to remind yourself of the cross? Some people get upset when they're like, you're just preaching the gospel way too much. We want something different. Well, the gospel, the cross, is central to your life, your Christian life. And the more you think about it, the more deeper you go in the grace and love, the more that helps you grow in your Christian life.